Welcome to the Social Engineer Podcast, the Security Awareness Series. We're in episode 160. I'm Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer, social-engineer.org, and the Innocent Lives Foundation. I've been hosting this podcast since way back in 2009, and I'm joined by my awesome Scottish co-host, Ryan MacDougall. You have to say it that way.
No, you have to say it that way.
Yeah, I do.
As you said, I'm Ryan MacDougall.
You
I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Social Engineer LLC. I'm also the open source intelligence trainer for SECom and have trained at multi-years at Black Hat, DerbyCon, as well as private trainings and public classes. I've been in the information security field for almost 24 years, with the last 9 being focused on adversary simulation and security awareness. Thanks for having me here.
And since you look like you're 30, that means you started in the field when he was 6. Early starter. Okay.
Yeah.
This episode, as usual, is sponsored by social-engineer.com. We are your trusted information security vendor, and this is a fitting topic for today because we're talking about vishing and phishing and identity fraud and other things like that, which are all the areas that we focus on. You can find out more information on social-engineer.com. Check out what we do and how we do it. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to talk to you. Did you know that we run a Slack channel? Well, we get a lot of requests to join. So if you don't see it in the show notes, which I think is right down there, just ping me on Twitter and I'll give you the link. But we have over 1,000 people in there, a couple dozen channels talking about phishing, vishing, the psychology behind it, physical red teaming, SE teaming, all different types of topics. So feel free to come on in and join us there. And if you haven't heard, which I'm sure you have since you listened to this podcast even once, you know I'm a huge fan of Clutch. We want to thank them for giving us the music for the podcast here. You can check them out on pro-rock.com and enjoy your life just a lot more because of their music. Don't forget innocentlivesfoundation.org. My awesome team over there at ILF have helped with now over 405 cases, if you can believe that. I remember starting this thing 4 years ago, and I was excited when we hit 9. I can't believe we've actually helped with 405 cases, which means we have helped stop a lot of child predators. I'm really excited about the work that we're doing. Check out the new annual report on the website. Of course, if you want to donate, we're a 501c3, means we're a charity, so we can always use that. And if you want to help out, please sign up to help us out over there at innocentlivesfoundation.org. Last but not least, I'm excited to talk about next year's conference. We have changed the name to the Human Behavior Conference. Why? Someone asked me. Well, we really wanted to focus on what makes up social engineering, but also how we can use those skills in everyday life, not just in focusing on cyber attacks, but how we use them in communications with our families, our employers, other people that we meet. So we have some of the world's leading researchers and scientists coming in to talk about things like nonverbals, influence, persuasion, deception, just so many different topics. You could check it out on humanbehaviorcon.com. And it's March 24th through 26th in 2022, and it will be live. We're not doing it online this year. You know, of course, that is as long as COVID stays away. We got some good news about that this morning. So check it out there. Join us down here in Orlando. Guarantee it's going to be an amazing time. Now, let's get to the whole reason we're here. I'm joined by my awesome guest today, Adam Levin. Adam is a nationally recognized expert on cybersecurity, privacy, identity theft, fraud, and personal finance. And he's distinguished himself as a fierce consumer advocate for over 50 years. Adam is the former director of the New Jersey Division of Consumer Affairs, and he currently is a founder of CyberScout and co-founder of Credit.com. He also authored a critically acclaimed book entitled Swiped: How to Protect Yourself in a World Full of Scammers, Phishers, and Identity Thieves, which sounds right up our alley, doesn't it? Adam is also the host of a podcast called What the Hack? I almost said that wrong, where they talk to fascinating people about the most terrifying things that have ever happened to them in cyberspace, and yet they make fun. Don't make fun of them. They make it fun. That's what I meant to say. Maybe they make fun of them too. We'll find out. But Adam, I can't thank you enough for joining us here today. This is going to be a great show.
Well, Chris, thank you for having me, and also to Mr. MacDougall. I appreciate the opportunity that we can all spend some time together.
You see, awesome. You have to say it that way. See, okay. That's the way it goes. Okay, Adam, let's start off with something simple. How did you get into this? How did cybersecurity or information security become the thing that you were going to focus on?
Well, starting in my days at the Division of Consumer Affairs in New Jersey, consumer protection and protection of legitimate businesses has always been part of my DNA. We started a company called Credit.com back in 93. As a matter of fact, we were so early to the game that we managed to swap a hard drive for the domain Credit.com. And while I was involved in a transition of operating partners at Credit.com, I was approached by friends who had a legal services company, but not any of the famous ones you've heard about. And they said they were about to make a bid on the credit card portfolio of a major international corporation. And they felt that their bid might be a little high, but there was this thing called identity theft that they were hearing more and more about. And they felt that if they could offer an identity theft service as part of their bundle, it would make their bid more palatable. So they said, you're in the credit world. You must know somebody who's involved in the identity theft world. See if you can, find us somebody. And my new partners and I, we looked around and they came back to me after 3 months and said, nobody does it right. There are people who have done it as an additional revenue stream. There are the reporting agencies that are doing it because it's part of what they do. But nobody has really started an organization where putting people back together again was the core competence of the organization. And so we started, at that time, it was Identity Theft 911. And the core competence of it was, in fact, a team of fraud specialists who would work directly with consumers. We were the first organization that didn't need a power of attorney to work with people, that it became sort of a de facto thing, because the whole point was helping people get through it and not making them feel more disempowered than they already did being victims of it. And that went very well. We started to grow. Some of our bigger clients in the insurance industry said, you're scaring our clients, our policyholders half to death with your name. So we became IDT 911, which then people said, so are you an alarm company or a phone company? And then a few years ago, CyberScout went global, and where operations were in the US, Canada, the EU, Asia, and Malaysia. And we fell upon CyberScout, which we adopted as a name. And then in March of 2001, a company called Santique purchased CyberScout. So it was a very exciting day. And then a couple of weeks ago, TransUnion purchased Santique. So it's been a big year for everyone.
Wow. Congratulations, first of all, on all of that. Yeah. So you said you started that back in the 90s.
Credit.com, yes.
Credit.com. So how have you seen a shift in the type of attacks that make up identity fraud from the 90s till now?
Well, the truth is that when you look at identity theft attacks and cyber attacks, of course, cyber attacks are the logical evolution, unfortunately, of all the things that occurred with identity theft. But the attacks are more planned. There's more research done by the attackers. They don't throw the wide net over anything anymore. They do what we call the one to many, which is they find an organization, which is a tasty target. They research. Research can be as simple as going on LinkedIn and seeing all the people that work for a company, seeing their titles and changing it. And then going after those specific people in imposter type scams where they were either the boss or somebody that's already a client or something, where they convince somebody to do something that's stupid. And all of a sudden they're in. And as you know, there are 4 types of hackers, which are the state-sponsored, for-profit, cause-related, and because I can, and the four prongs of an attack, which used to be just phishing. It's now really more spear phishing, direct phishing, vishing, which is phone-related phishing, smishing, which is text-related phishing. And they've been very successful at it. I mean, look at the raft of ransomware attacks and the staggering amounts of money. I mean, the old days, pay me a few bucks, I go away. Now it's, I want 50 million. And oh, by the way, I'm also going to sell all the data that I happen to steal in the process of freezing all of the files in your computers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So think of it as it's literally the same song, just different lyrics.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about a current one then and analyze it a little bit. Robinhood just happened last week, I think it was, right? So tell us about that. How does this fall? How does the Robinhood breach fall into what we're discussing here right now?
Well, it falls into it in the sense that, once again, somebody made a mistake, provided information to a bad guy who was able to then use that information to infiltrate the systems. And based on everything we know as to what was stolen or what was exposed, their names and email addresses. So on the scale of, is this the most terrifying breach you've ever heard of? The answer is no. Equifax is probably the most terrifying breach we've heard of because that's where they got everything, plus the kitchen sink, probably down to the length of your index finger. That would be a level 10, oh my God, we're in serious trouble kind of a breach. With names and addresses, the problem is that you can be phished. And you can be phished in context because they know what you like based on where your name and email address were found. And the other problem with it is that your email address is 1/2 for most people of their login credentials, because many sites still require people to use their email address as their user ID. So the problem is, though, you have an enormous number of people on a very popular website that's very public. You assume that these guys spend a whole lot of money on security. But then this goes back to Bruce Schneier, who's one of the lions in our field, who loves to say that if you think throwing money at technology is going to solve your security problems, then you don't understand security and you don't understand the technology.
Yeah. So what is it? I mean, how do we manage it? Because, I agree with you. And every time we hear of an attack like this, we hear people say, you have to spend more money on the blinky boxes, right? Because that will fix it. And then it doesn't fix it. So what should people be focusing on when they hear stories like this?
Well, what they should be focusing on is people. Is that, your employees are your first point of attack and your last line of defense. And, we developed a framework, Bo Friedlander and I, who wrote the book Swiped. And the framework is what we call the 3 M's. How do you minimize your risk of exposure, reduce your attackable surface in a world where you're surrounded by billions of Internet of Things devices that are tracking you, supposedly sending information back to manufacturers or having that information diverted to the bad guys, eavesdropping on you. So it's sort of these devices, most of which are not really super secure. They were created for the purpose of making things more convenient and making them work. But security was never the prime directive in the creation of most of these devices. So how do you minimize your risk? How do you effectively monitor so you know that you have a problem? And then what's your plan to manage the damage? And the theory is the same for consumers and businesses. Obviously, the things that have to be done are a little different. But the way we deal with this stuff is businesses have to create a culture of privacy and security from the mailroom to the boardroom and back again to the mailroom. If for all of those businesses where a significant percentage of the people who work for them are working from home, then they have to also educate all of their employees to understand that from the living room to the home office back to the living room, there also has to be a culture of privacy and security, one element of which is a work-only device that is not shared with your children. Because kids can be a weapon of mass destruction within a family and also for a business organization.
Yeah. Now, these ideas sound simplistic, and yet we always find that people it feels like they want something really complicated. Like this problem is big, so it can't be that easy. Have you found that these simplistic solutions really work?
Well, they do, because it's, as I say, the devil is in the details. So in addition to significant employee training and creating an environment of privacy and security by design, which one of my good buddies, Ann Kavukian, was the creator of the concept. Also, companies have to map their data. They have to know where the data, first of all, they have to know what they have. Then they have to know where it is. And then they have to do what's necessary to protect it where it is. They also need to be using endpoint security. They have to have a zero trust environment. You can't assume because you built the wall and the moat, no one's going to get through. You have to assume it's entirely possible that they will get through. So how do you protect the data? Work-only devices, multi-factor authentication. You'd be surprised at how many companies still don't use multi-factor authentication. They found when the federal government was suffering just breach after breach after breach, part of it was because many federal agencies were not practicing multi-factor authentication. They also did not have a policy that you will not, under any circumstances, be allowed to use the same password here that you use at home to get into your Netflix account. That's not going to work. And there has to be strict password protocols and unique passwords, and data segregation is that, what do you absolutely need to operate? What is the data that is critical to your organization? Who has access to it? When do they have access to it? And how are we monitoring the access they have? So that's the first M. The second M, much shorter, is how do you effectively monitor? Well, you don't just patch and pray. You have to have a serious vulnerability testing program and a vulnerability management program. You have to have people from the outside also trying to get in. Too often, many people say, no, our inside guys, they'll try to get in. Well, you're already in. You need somebody who's not you to try to get in. And the third M, which I think is becoming more and more critical based on everything we're seeing, is how do you manage the damage? And, a lot of companies say, I'll deal with it when it happens. Well, as you know from red teaming and simulations and everything you guys do, is that unless you are preparing for, unfortunately, what is the inevitable, that somewhere, somehow, somebody's going to click on the wrong link, somebody's going to get in, they're going to get access to something. So how do you limit their access? And then how do you deal with it? And it's not, I'm going to call my IT department. It has to be a multi-department cooperative effort, legal, PR, technology, human resources, everyone in the organization really looking at this in a different way, and then planning out what happens if. And if a company fails to respond urgently, transparently, and empathetically to a problem like this, they're gone. It's just a question of how badly are they gone. Some companies are so huge they can survive it, but many medium and small size businesses, in particular small businesses, go out after an attack like this or after a ransomware attack where they don't have proper cyber liability insurance. And what's worse, even if they had it, they didn't understand how to effectively use it and to know what they need to do in order to keep it. Because the last thing you want is, I have it, I'm about to use it, and they tell me, I'm sorry, you're not covered because you didn't live up to the promises you made when we provided the insurance.
So Adam, with reference to your data segregation that you're talking about, what advice can you give to companies that maybe aren't as, not the largest companies, but those medium and small businesses that have these customer-facing people, like the Robinhood thing? They took a customer service representative was the one who was ultimately targeted and attacked, right? So this person had access to a whole bunch of stuff. What type of advice would you give to companies that need to have public-facing employees, but then how to mitigate that risk a little bit?
Well, I think if you have public-facing employees, which more and more companies are trying to do, although we know with some of the monoliths, like somebody gets their Instagram account hacked, and if they don't move fast enough, they can't find anybody to help them, and people are locked out of accounts for a long period of time. So, but when you have public-facing employees. You have to train them. You have to continually do anti-phishing training. Although, for instance, somebody will come to me and say, great news, 95% of our people don't fall for it. I said, what about the other 5%? Well, we're going to get them too. I said, that's great. But just remember, as a defender, you got to get everything right. As an attacker, you only have to find one crack or crevice to crawl through. So it's all about need to know, need to use, and setting up a layered process that it's not so easy for someone who's public facing to simply buy someone's story and then get access to something.
You mentioned before when you were talking about how to handle it, you said something quite interesting, that the company has to deal with it empathetically. Tell me what that means to you, because that's something we talk about often here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, it's almost like a spiritual digital hug. But what you really need to do as an organization is say, whatever happened, there are people that are going to be impacted by it. They're going to be at best collateral damage, which is very bad for the people. And at worst, they're going to end up not only with their data being exposed, but somebody actually coming after them, demanding payment in order not to expose the data. So you have to have something that acknowledges that they have been hurt, or there is the likelihood or even the possibility they're going to be hurt. And then you have to offer some sort of remedy to these people where they feel like your customers, your vendors, that you really are, you care about them and you're trying to do something for them. And for people to go, yeah, we'll give you, a year of credit monitoring. It's like, dude, once somebody has your social security number, the only expiration date is yours. And even then, millions of people have been victims of identity theft after they passed away. Yeah. So you have to have helplines. You have to have people there to answer questions. You have to make this available to them, and it should be a lot longer than a year, although most companies don't want to spend the money, and they don't realize at the end of the day, they're going to be losing customers and trust of the community. But we have to continually work to, like, for instance, when CyberScout used to work for different organizations when we were called in to do incident response, we had a policy where we were open pretty much 24/7, and B, that even after we resolved the problem for the specific consumer, that we encouraged them to call us 6 months after, 1 year after, and we would check up with them. And it's one of those things where it may take a few minutes, but at the same point, the message, especially for a small business, the message it conveys, we really care about you. And we're sorry. We really mean we're sorry. Because all of these companies always go, privacy and security is number one, and we love everyone, and we care about you, and go to this website that's probably going to crash because too many people showed up at our website. And, we're going to send you a kit and good night, good luck, or we'll give you a limited program. You can't do that. You really have to go out of your way, and that will make the difference between a bad event, a near extinction level event, or an extinction level event, depending upon the organization. But it also means they need to be working with professional organizations who do this all the time, so they know what to do. I mean, think about the fact that in the United States right now, there is no national breach notification law. You have 54 separate jurisdictions, each with a different law. Some are somewhat similar, some overlap, but some have different notification, some have different notification periods. And for a company to face something like this alone without working with somebody that knows how to navigate this system, companies put themselves in harm's way. And in particular, the issues are, will there be litigation? Will there be regulatory action? Will there be the loss of trust by consumers? All of these different things. And I always say to people, not only do you have to worry about the government regulators, but you always have to keep your eye on the regulators of the American economic system, also known as class action lawsuit attorneys.
Yeah, so I really like that messaging about the empathetic approach, because we talk a lot about that from an internal perspective too. Like, how do they deal with their employees once there was a breach? And we're big proponents of being empathetic with those, because, like, I think you said it before earlier in our conversation, that, you don't want they already feel bad. They already feel bad about being part of the breach. Now we have a choice. We can make them feel worse, which isn't going to really make them any more secure, or we could try to bolster them up, educate them, and help them not fall for it again. I feel like that piece is such a huge missing piece in many of these programs when we meet with companies and talk about it.
Well, no, and it's also so important for a company to create a culture where people have no problem going forward and saying, look, I messed up. And because the faster that someone tells you there's a problem, even if you haven't seen it manifest itself yet, the faster that the company can take those measures that are required in order to make sure that they limit the damage. So if an employee comes to you and says, look, I clicked on the wrong link, immediately you can have your folks and your forensic people go in and see where these folks might be hiding, see if there's been any exfiltration of data that looks a little bit different. Now, of course, the Target breach was a perfect example where the hackers were so clever, they only exfiltrated a certain amount of data on a daily basis that looked like the normal operations that Target would be engaging in. But it's all about people have to understand we're all on the same team. And more importantly, we all have day jobs, whether working for a company, running a company, owning a company, philanthropic activities, education, raising a family, whatever it is. But to the bad guys, we are their day job. So it's really, we're put in an unfair position on day one. And in particular, it's a position that technology alone cannot protect us against. And the fact that cybersecurity is a team sport and it's a marathon. Because any company can be secure at 9 a.m. in the morning. That's why there are no victory laps in cybersecurity. And at 9:01, somebody answers the wrong phone call, clicks on the wrong link, somebody downloads the wrong app, and all of a sudden, the company, its employees, all of its customers, vendors, clients, they're all become exposed.
Yeah. We've met with a number of companies that they have policies like people getting fired for clicking on link, even if it's a test link, like that you do this X amount of times in a year and you're fired. And what we have noticed is exactly what you said. In those companies, the reporting statistics are in the dumpster. No one's going to report anything because admitting that I did it means I might get fired. So maybe if I don't admit it, I won't get caught and I can keep my job.
But it
just feels like so adversarial, right? Because the IT guys are out to catch you, but catching you means you might get fired. So it's almost like a battle, not a team. Like you just painted that wonderful picture of a team. We just don't see that in many, many companies.
Well, I'll give you an example of something that a lot of employers are starting to do. Over 35% of employers do it now. And it's anticipated this number will go up to 75%, is that they're making identity protection services available to their employees as part of an employee benefits program, either employer paid or voluntary benefits program. And where that's really critical is someone might become a victim in their non-work environment. Yeah. And they work with this company and they, because they're learning all the time based on what they're seeing going on with them, and it makes them even want to report things, especially if they realize that they're using the same password at home and throughout their universe of accounts as they're using at the business. And the business hasn't, had a strict policy of business only devices, unique passwords only to the business, things like that. So, and businesses have realized, a few things. And that is, if I protect my employee through an identity protection, cyber protection program, first of all, they're not going to be freaked out because I won't get productivity out of a freaked out employee. Secondly, they won't get all their coworkers involved because it's suddenly like, even though we don't have water coolers too much anymore, at least the digital water cooler where everyone is now focused on how do we help Bob get through his identity problem for his family. And at the same point, the business realizes it's protecting itself. Because again, if your personal login credentials are stolen and they're shared, you could be in harm's way as the employer.
So we're looking to the future and, I can't believe we're even saying this out loud, but it's like we're going to be in 2022 in moments. I don't know what happened to the last 2 years. As painful as they were, it seemed like we were in a time warp. But what do you see coming? What do you see coming in the near future as far as these type of scams? What do you foresee being the things we need to be worried about?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is supply chain scams. Because we already know that the constricted supply chain is creating problems in every industry, including people are freaked out about what's going to happen at Christmas. Just, toys, food, all that. When you have, and to complicate matters, when you have these attacks, like on the meat processing folks or Colonial Pipeline or things like that, that only tends to make matters worse. And it also, when somebody sees an opportunity to find a way around a constricted supply chain, they may take it, not realizing that shortcut ended up putting them in harm's way as well, because they're more amenable to a sales pitch or something else coming from someone who seems to be legitimate, but in fact is not legitimate. So I think that. Now, the holiday season is coming, which again, if somebody comes compromised and their credentials are compromised, those credentials could be used to access businesses. You have charity scams. You're going to have discount travel scams. You're going to have general retail discount scams, job scams. A lot of people are looking for seasonal employment. Even as an example, after the Great resignation, there are people that are in flux right now that say, well, at least let me find something to tide me over while I'm looking to get a much better job. Vacation rental scams, things like this. And the other thing that's so important for people to realize, and even people in smaller companies, you'll get somebody saying, why would anyone want to hack me?
Yeah.
I'm just a regular guy. I look in the mirror and I see me. But when a hacker looks at you, they see Jay-Z, Beyonce, Adam Levin, because you got what they want. You have data, access to all things financial, or the big thing is you might be the tributary to a larger river. Mm-hmm. Like the HVAC subcontractor that was the way in for the guys who hacked Target. Yeah. Or one of the Customs and Border Patrol contractors who was supplying photographs and license plates as people would come across the border, where they would then be checked against the facial recognition that they have in the criminal database or the terrorist database. Well, the subcontractor to a contractor got hacked. And as a result, it kind of worked its way up the chain. So everyone needs to understand, A, these guys, it's their day job, and B, it may not be us they're after, but we're a convenient way to get to a spouse, a religious organization, a business, a government agency, things like that.
So in this list that you gave of all these different scams, it's a wide ocean of possible scams. Do you have any kind of layman's terms guidance for people how to navigate those waters a little bit when it's just an onslaught of things of people coming after them? What are some things people can look out for?
Well, I think that, everything from like catfishing scams where someone comes on too fast, too hard, is a drama king or queen, never can meet with you, and then all of a sudden starts asking you for either money or critical data. Charity scams, again, this is the time of the year in particular where people are going to be, their heartstrings will be tugged. First of all, there's disasters going on all around the world, food shortages and things like that. Plus the fact that this is the time to give for tax purposes as well, because it's the end of the year. We have to do that. So, my rules are always strict password protocols. You don't share your passwords across your university websites. Use two-factor authentication. Never, ever authenticate yourself to anyone who contacts you for any reason. If you're in control of the interaction because you're the one that made contact and they ask you to confirm who you are or give, additional authentication credentials, they're trying to protect you. They're not trying to exploit you. But if someone calls out of the blue and says they're the Internal Revenue Service, they're the Department of Health, they're your financial institution, the minute they start asking you for sensitive personal information, hang up, independently verify the way you communicate with that organization, and then call them directly. Also, you don't just click on links or open attachments during the holiday season. For instance, e-cards. E-cards are a wonderful mask for sending malware-laden things to people where you can get into their computers, find out where they're logging on, put ransomware in their computers, use it as a conduit someplace else. So don't click on links or open attachments unless you confirm you know who they're from. And even then, it's possible they sent you a link that they didn't realize was contaminated. Like that. Don't download the newest, coolest, shiniest, brightest app that you've heard about without actually reading reviews, checking it out, and going to legitimate app stores. And even then, there have been some of these not so great apps that have slid through these app stores. And freeze your credit. Freeze your credit. Make it more difficult for someone to convince someone that they're you. So do that. For consumers, get your credit report and read them. And in particular, look for what you didn't do, because that will give you a clue. Your credit score takes a sudden precipitous drop. That's a warning sign. Sign up for transactional alerts at retailers so that anytime a transaction occurs with your credit card accounts or your bank accounts, you're notified. Something as simple as look at explanation of benefit statements coming from your insurer, because you may look at it and go, that may have been an examination of someone named Adam Levin, but I'm not the Adam Levin that they examined, and why is it on my insurance? Or when you try to file your tax return and you're blocked saying that someone already used your social security number, don't think because you figured it out with the IRS and you guys are square that doesn't mean these people don't have enough information now to masquerade as you to anything, including Robinhood or any of the other organizations that have been breached. And the final thing is, as it is for businesses offering their employees identity protection services, a lot of people don't realize that through their insurance company, some of their financial institutions, and their employers, programs are available to help them through cyber and identity incidents. And it's incumbent upon them to actually find out if there is such a program for them and then take advantage of it.
We had a few conversations with some folks who who work in healthcare over in the UK and EU. And when COVID first started getting huge over in that part of the world, you mentioned supply chain. People couldn't find the N95 masks. And one of the biggest scams that were going around were people calling hospitals and saying that they had a glut of these masks and they would sell them. And hospitals were just tossing money out because they needed them for their workers. And then finding out it was a scam, that people, of course, the mask never came and they lost all this money. You oftentimes see that human catastrophe is used because of the emotional factor to get people to fall for these type of things. Absolutely.
And whether it involves a charitable organization where somebody's masquerading as them in order to trick people into providing information and, financial information, whether it's, well, of course, COVID, the amount of scams, I was reading that these, pandemic or epidemic related scams went totally wild in 2020, and they were used, the way in for people who are working at home and everything else, whether they were calling to say to you that they could get you into line faster if you needed a test, or they're calling you because it's contact tracing, but then they give you the name of the person who is supposedly the victim, who you know because they may have followed you through social media or something. One thing that doesn't happen is no health organization is going to give you the name of the person that exposed. They're going to say, we think you've been exposed. We want you to take a test. And the list, vaccinations, a lot of people, because of the different age categories, fell for, we can get you a faster vaccine test. And then there was the whole issue of somebody using supply chain confusion to get their hands on different vaccines and either contaminate them for nation state purposes, or find ways of getting them and then selling them on the black market. These things go on all the time. So disasters are the perfect thing for that, as well as news reports of the disasters. A lot of people will go online and they hear about a disaster and they immediately go to Google, and the first thing they see, they click on it. They may not realize that someone is behind that link, and that's not a legitimate link. That's why I always say, go to the source if you don't want remorse. Go to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Newsmax, any wherever you get your news, and then there you'll learn about it. But don't just click on links that suddenly appear and pop up in your computer and go, oh yeah, I need to follow this.
I love that. I'm writing that down. Go to the source so there's no remorse. It's a good catchphrase. Adam, if people want to follow you or find out more about your work, or they find these topics interesting, where can they go? Where can they go to
Well, they can come to adamlevin.com. And
Excellent.
Half of them will think, oh, I'm going to learn about Maroon 5. But no, anyway, come to adamlevin.com, and, or you can come to the website, or where you get your podcast at What the Hack with Adam Levin, which every week there's a new episode. And, a lot of people will, when they listen, they'll say, that happened to me. And, so, we get a chance to talk it through. But, I used to be able to say, well, come to cyberscout.com, but I'm no longer CyberScout. So,
I think on adamlevin.com, you should have Maroon 5 playing as background noise, just to offer nice music,
Well, the funniest thing is, I guess a couple years ago at the Ronda Rousey fight in Las Vegas, my wife and I went, and she ended up sitting next to Mrs. Adam Levine. So it was an interesting experience.
Small world, right?
I get great restaurant reservations, I'll tell you that.
That's great. I love that. So what do you think are some steps that corporations should take right now to work on the advice that you gave today? Like, we always like to conclude with some positive messaging. So what are some action steps that they should take?
Well, I think, first of all, more and more threat sharing is going on, which is extremely important. Part of why we love doing the show also is because we say to people, we're putting you in a no shame environment. We want you to share your story so other people can learn. So there has been a greater effort on the part of the federal government now and state governments to do threat sharing with businesses. There's a little bit less holding back things like, oh, by the way, we have Eternal Blue. We're the NSA. And there's a little bit more openness going on now. So, share the experience, share the threat information, train your employees. That's a positive. Making people want to feel like they're part of the community in an organization, so that we're all pulling in the same direction, because one of us can make a mistake, but we've got your back. And the whole point is we need to have each other's backs, because at the end of the day, we're not only protecting us, but we're protecting everyone who does business with us or who trusts us. So it's really more about how do we humanize the process, understanding that the weakest link has always been humans. Mm-hmm. And acknowledging that is, to me, I think, a very positive thing. And in particular, everybody saying it is our we own a piece of this, that we own a piece of the privacy of the organization. We own a piece of the security of the organization. And we're going to learn. It's not one of the things that you get when you get your orientation package, and then a year later they go, oh, well, okay, let's review this again and give you a test. It has to be an ongoing conversation where people are invested in it because they understand the ramifications of not being invested in it.
I love that. One of the things we always ask people is about their mentors, because we all got here with some help, I'm sure. Do you have a favorite person or a mentor? I know it's a hard one, maybe not a favorite person, but who would you consider your greatest mentor and how you got to where you are today?
Well, actually, one of my greatest mentors is Virginia Long, who was the director of consumer affairs prior to my being named director. And in fact, she convinced the governor to nominate me, and I was the first person ever appointed from within. And I was 27, so it was kind of an exciting adventure.
Wow.
I have three others that are very meaningful. One is Ian Cohn, and he's now the CEO of a company called Locker, which is a privacy company. He and I built Credit.com together. Bill Tate, who was one of the principal guys up at Humana, who was vice chairman of our board. And then somebody that I really learned a great deal from after we hired her as our CEO is Jennifer Luer, who came from Experian. And she took us to a valuation 4 times of what it was when she showed up in just 18 months. And I just learned a lot from every one of the people I mentioned. They're all super smart, caring, mentoring type people. Because that's the problem, as you know, there's a big difference between being a manager and being a mentor.
Yeah.
And it's making people want to do better and making people proud of who they are and what they do. And more importantly, not making people feel bad if they make a mistake by saying, how do we learn from this?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. What a nice list. And then last but not least, besides your book, which we'll put in the show notes, do you have any favorite books? It doesn't even be about this topic. It could be just be a book you read that you think other people would enjoy. Well,
the 2 things. First of all, I'm a movie and TV fanatic. In fact, I've just been watching Condor, which was a 2-season based on the original Condor movie with Robert Redford. It's fascinating. I mean, I do like to get lost in like spy novels, like Tom Clancy, Brad Thor, Vince Flynn, and a lot of these different series now that I think are really pretty exceptional that you find. Things like Yellowstone and Condor. And I've become totally obsessed with the entire FBI series and all of its spin-offs. So in certain ways, it makes me feel like I'm working in my world, but I'm just getting to share it with people who are a little bit more action-oriented than I am.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's great. That's a good recommendations. Thank you for that. Adam, I can't thank you enough. What a great conversation. And it's validating, I think, for us to hear somebody with your years of experience coming in, and your message is something that we've been mirroring and saying for years now. The approach that you have to people and how to handle these security elements are something that's really close to us. So thank you for sharing that with us today, and thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Well, listen, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Ryan, for allowing me to come on and lower your digital property values. And
Not at all.
Would love to do this again. But what you guys are doing is awesome, and I think it's just so important for people to hear about this, and not to panic, but also not to sit idly by and assume it'll never happen to them as an organization. Yeah. It's just better to be prepared. What's the old line? It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Yeah, I love it. That's a wonderful parting message, and thank you for that. And thank you all for joining us today on the Security Awareness Series. Next month, we will be joined by John Strand from Black Hills Information Security. Really excited about that one. I've known John for almost 15 years, more than that now. So excited to see what's up in his life. Thank you again for Adam. Thank you, Ryan. Don't forget to check out innocentlivesfoundation.org, social-engineer.com, and a big shout out for Clutch one last time. And we will see you next month. See ya.